Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 18th, 2021. U.S. House of Representatives starts debate on the $1.75 trillion social spending and tax bill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi looking for a final vote before the day is through. President Joe Biden talking climate change, immigration, and other issues in meetings at the White House with leaders of Canada and Mexico. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signing bills into law, allowing workers several exemptions to the business vaccine mandate the Biden administration is putting in place. And senators questioning President Biden's nominee for Comptroller of the Currency about her writings that they say suggest she wants to nationalize the U.S. banking system. One senator even calling her a communist. She denies it vigorously. We'll have portions of the hearing and speak with a reporter. The Hill reporting mid-afternoon Thursday, the Congressional Budget Office says it will be publishing its full cost estimate of President Biden's sweeping social spending plan later on Thursday. So far, the nonpartisan budget scorekeeper has published estimates for 11 of the 13 individual titles of the legislation. The office said it will publish estimates for the remaining 2 titles this afternoon. The long-awaited analysis comes as House Democrats have delayed passage on the massive trillion-dollar spending plan in recent weeks, amid pushback from moderates demanding fiscal information on the massive bill. But Democratic leaders on Thursday said they were hoping to hold a vote as early as today. That was from the Hill. No vote yet as we go to air at 5 p.m. Eastern this Thursday. But general debate on the bill did get underway today. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, rising in favor.
This is an incredible day. The House will pass the Build Back Better Act, President Biden's popular and necessary agenda, and say to Americans everywhere, we've got your back. Today, we say to families everywhere that we will cut your child care costs in half and provide universal pre-K to 3- and 4-year-olds. Today, we are finally going to take on Big Pharma, cut the cost of prescription drugs, and make sure that people can afford the cost of insulin. This bill makes the biggest federal investment in housing in our history and allows America to truly lead on taking on climate change, with $500 billion investment and 40% of those funds going to communities that are most disproportionately burdened by the effects of climate change. And for the first time in 35 years, we say to immigrants, you are truly essential, not expendable, and we will protect dreamers, TPS holders, essential workers, and farm workers. Thank you, President Biden, for your leadership. We will provide transformative change for people across America and invest in our competitiveness, our thriving, not surviving, and our humanity. Thank you. I yield back.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal during the House debate Thursday afternoon. Opposing this bill, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado.
Madam Speaker, America does not need and cannot afford this junk. America doesn't need 80,000 new IRS agents snooping in our private transactions. These are politically weaponized bureaucrat bullies that we are looking to hire more of. America cannot afford $1.5 trillion in new taxes while federal bureaucrats haul off and spend $4.1 billion on electric bicycles. Do they realize that this will use more fossil fuels, more petroleum products to create electric bicycles than a conventional bicycle? I don't think so, and I think they've lost their ever-loving minds. $7.8 billion for environmental justice going towards woke universities. $100 billion for amnesty workarounds as our southern border is completely invaded by nearly 2 million illegal aliens, many of them criminal aliens. There's $550 billion for Green New Deal policies and tax breaks so congressional members from the Bronx can afford a new Tesla. Biden's broke-back budget has another $330 billion to incentivize workers to stay home. Newsflash to the party of wealthy cities and wealthy elites. We have a worker shortage right now in America. We have an inflation crisis. This will only make things worse, much worse, not better. But let me guess, when things do get worse, as they inevitably will, we'll need to re-elect y'all's sorry selves so you can fix it, right? No thanks, I'll pass, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on this monstrosity of a spending bill. And I yield back.
Congresswoman Lauren Boebert during today's debate on the $1.75 trillion social spending and tax bill. No final vote yet. Still waiting for the CBO score, Congressional Budget Office, analyzing the bill as to how much it's going to cost and how much revenue it's going to raise and whether it'll add to the federal budget deficit. CBO saying they will provide that today. And the House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, a Democrat from Maryland, saying Thursday afternoon, "It is my hope that we will complete this legislation today so that this would be the last legislative day prior to the Thanksgiving work period." He does set the floor schedule. Large part of this bill is climate programs. That was the main topic today at the White House as President Biden met in the Oval Office with the visiting Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
Well, it's great to welcome back the Prime Minister, who we've been good friends for a while. But it's great to have him here in the White House. We've had a lot of meetings around the country, around the world. We've been with each other, half a dozen times almost so far. It's been a busy year. And I know we're both keeping our minds close to the families affected by the storms, flooding in the British Columbia area and the Pacific Northwest. But one of the things we've spent time on is on our global agenda is climate change. We've spent a lot of time dealing with that. We are on the same page as to the need for us to move on it and get the rest of the world to move. And since our first bilateral meeting back in February, we've met in venues around the world getting COVID-19 under control, trying to deal with the next pandemic, be prepared for it, as well as meeting infrastructure needs across the developing world. We see an opportunity not only to enhance the prospects of a better life for people around the world, but we can do it by the Build Back Better, World Build Back Better effort, that we can provide for the health needs as well. We're contributing a significant amount of vaccines, no strings attached, and we also think we should be building back in a more significant, more environmentally friendly way. We're meeting infrastructure needs, as I said. We're driving inclusive economic recovery together as two nations and meeting the climate crisis and standing for democratic values. And so we spend a lot of time at the G7, the G20, the COP26, and I think we both think we're at our best when opportunity, equity, and justice all coincide, and they're the core values of Canadians and the United States. So this is one of the easiest relationships you can have as an American president, one of the best. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Joe. It's been a busy year. It is a pleasure to be back here in Washington with you, but as you say, we have had the virtual BILA. We've had many encounters at all sorts of different international fora where we've been strongly aligned on environment, on fighting COVID and getting through this pandemic, preparing for future challenges, but also on building back better and recovering our economies in ways that work for the middle class, for people working hard to join it in a way that is inclusive and fair. And we've got a lot of work to continue to do. The easy work is done here at home. The hard work around the world, making sure we're bringing people along, and that's something that we're always great partners on. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici pour parler d'environnement, pour parler de commerce, pour parler d'en finir avec la pandémie. Beaucoup de travail à faire ensemble, mais j'ai bien hâte de l'entamer. I'm really looking forward to this, so thank you, Joe.
Mr. President, can I ask you a question about your tax incentives for electric vehicles that would be assembled in the United States? The Canadian government says that would be a violation of the new trade agreement we just signed. Are you going to consider a carve-out for Canada, given the fact that our auto industries are so integrated?
We're going to talk about that to some extent.
No.
To make changes for Canada?
I said we're going to talk about that. We haven't even it hadn't even passed yet through the House. We're about to see that move, and we don't know what will happen in the Senate, but there's a lot of complicating factors. We're going to talk about it.
President Joe Biden and the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau in the Oval Office. President Biden also meeting in the Oval Office later with the President of Mexico, and then the three leaders meeting as a group for the North American Leaders Summit, first one since 2016. Canadian press writing about that last issue that President Biden was asked about in the social spending bill, a tax credit for new electric vehicles. The Canadian press writing, Canada and Mexico both are worried that the tax credit proposal, which if implemented as stands would be worth up to $12,500 to a new car buyer, is too heavily geared toward U.S.-made vehicles. Biden, who has made it clear he shares some of his predecessor's protectionist instincts, also designed the credit to favor vehicles made with U.S. union labor. This is for electric vehicles. And you're listening to Washington Today. From Fox News, a crowd supportive of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, chanted, "Let's go Brandon," as the governor prepared to sign a package of anti-COVID-19 vaccine mandate bills Thursday in Brandon, Florida. That phrase, "Let's go Brandon," exploded after an NBC reporter mistakenly used the phrase to describe a NASCAR crowd that was chanting, "F Joe Biden." That's how Fox News reported it. Here is Governor DeSantis signing those bills.
Well, we're really excited to be here, especially because when I signed this legislation today, we hear so much about all these things, mandates, restrictions, tearing people down. Today, we lift people up. We provide protections for people. No nurse, no firefighter, no police officer, no trucker, no anybody should lose their job because of these COVID jabs. And that's what we're doing. We're making sure that people have a right to earn a living, people have a right to have protections in their place of employment, and that parents have protections to be able to direct the upbringing of their kids. And if you look at what we're doing today, Florida is leading. This is the strongest piece of legislation that's been enacted anywhere in the country in this regard, and we're awfully proud to be able to do it here today at Brandon Honda. I want to thank the Florida legislature. We have we've got our Florida a number of legislators here, so I want to thank all of them, Speaker Chris Sprouse and Senate President Wilton Simpson. We also have Senator Burgess and Representatives Mazzullo, Grawl, and I think I saw Jackie Toledo. I saw Representative Zika and Lawrence McClure, and I think is Beltran here. I don't know if I saw him. So thank you guys. People were saying, Montana had done something, Tennessee had done something, and people were saying that this was not something that was going to end up happening, and they understood what was going on. I made the call to say we got to do this now because people are actually losing their jobs right now if we don't do these protections. So we needed to do that, and they stepped up, and I think it's something that's going to make a big, big difference for an awful lot of people.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at a bill signing ceremony in Brandon, Florida today. The bills he signed would prohibit schools from requiring students be vaccinated and require that private employers allow vaccine exemptions for their workers for such things as health or religious concerns, pregnancy or anticipated future pregnancy, and past recovery from COVID-19. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, is suspending enforcement of the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for large private businesses. This after a federal appeals court upheld a stay on it last week. Today, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked what businesses that fall under the mandate should do in the meantime.
Thanks. OSHA suspended its vaccine implementation and enforcement because of a court order. Given this update, is the administration still urging businesses to move forward with the president's vaccine and weekly testing rule? And are you still working off of that January 4th compliance deadline?
We are. Let me be very clear. Our message to businesses right now is to move forward with measures that will make their workplaces safer and protect them, their workforces from COVID-19. That was our message after the first stay issued by the Fifth Circuit. That remains our message, and nothing has changed. I would note that recent polling, I think that just came out yesterday, showed that 60% of businesses are moving forward with measures that keep their workplaces safe. They're essentially implementing components or versions of these vaccine requirements because they know it's in the interests of their workforces, to protect their workforces, to make sure they can bring more people back to the workforce, and we certainly see that as a positive sign. So we are still heading towards the same timeline. The Department of Justice is vigorously defending the emergency temporary standard in court, and we are confident in OSHA's authority.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki during her daily briefing. This case against the private employer vaccine mandate came from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, a Republican, along with Louisiana, Mississippi, Utah, and South Carolina. Other lawsuits have also been filed, in all over 20 state attorneys general and other groups challenging the private employer mandate in court. From NBC News, before the U.S. House voted Wednesday to censure Republican Congressman Paul Gosar and throw him off committees, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy delivered a veiled warning to Democrats that their seats may not be safe if his party takes control next year. Gosar was stripped of his committees after he posted an anime video depicting himself killing Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat, and brandishing swords at President Joe Biden. That was from NBC News. Both Leader McCarthy and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi were asked about the possibility of retribution if the Republicans take back the House. First, Speaker Pelosi.
Are you at all comfortable with the likelihood that if Republicans take the majority, they may retaliate against Democrats, remove them from their committees for any perceived or even serious offense that may happen?
Is the inference that I draw from your question that we should have not censured Mr. Gosar for his shameful behavior for fear of something the Republicans might do in the unlikely case that they might win the Congress? Even if they do, I don't expect that that's the case, and I'm doing everything in my power to make sure it isn't. Not just because of Gosar, but because of our democracy, which they are undermining every single day. And you see their behavior on the floor says they shouldn't have a gavel be anywhere near them ever. But no, we would not walk away from our responsibilities for fear of something they may do in the future.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, at her weekly briefing. The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, also held a weekly briefing, asked about his plans if his party becomes the majority in the House after the 2022 elections.
Leader McCarthy, if Republicans win back the majority in the next election, do you plan on stripping any Democrats of their committee assignments? And if so, who are some of those Democrats that might be in danger of losing their committee seats?
Look, I think I was very clear in my speech yesterday. Pelosi has set new policies here. Those same members that I talked about in my speech voted for those new policies. This isn't about threats, but it's about holding people accountable. I think the majority is going to have to approve any of those members on the committees of which they could serve. Yes.
With regards to Republicans who have been stripped of their committee assignments by this majority, do you plan to give Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar their committee assignments back if you take the majority?
They'll have committees. The committee assignment they have now, they may have other committee assignments. They may have better committee assignments. I think with Gosar, those are the ones he wants. Taylor Greene, she was just a freshman. I know she's requested others. She has a right to serve on committees.
House Republican Leader Kevin McCarthy asked there about returning the committee assignments to Paul Gosar and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, who was removed from her committee assignments earlier this year because of her past support of social media for right-wing conspiracy theories and political violence. The chair of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, interviewed by reporters today in a breakfast hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. ABC News reporter Rick Klein asking McDaniel about the new book from fellow ABC News reporter Jonathan Karl. The book is Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. And in that book, Karl reports that former President Donald Trump called McDaniel on his final day in office, threatening that he would leave the Republican Party and start his own political party. McDaniel asked if that's true.
My colleague Jonathan Pearl has a book out this week. In it, he recounts a conversation between you and President Trump where the outgoing president, said he planned to leave the party, and it recounts a scene with you and some of your aides trying to talk him out of that. You put out a statement afterward calling it false. President called it fake news. I just want to be clear. Did President Trump have a conversation with you where he said he would leave the party?
Listen, President Trump clearly has not left the party, and I've never shared my conversations with the president. I'm not about to start doing that now. But I will say one thing that's very true that was said in that statement, which is if he left the party, we would lose. If he left the party, Republicans would lose. I mean, he has built our party. He has added a new base. We've become a working class party. I saw it in my home state of Michigan. Look at Macomb County. He very vocally, when those rumors really started, put out that I'm not leaving it, and he's been on the field helping elect Republicans, and I imagine he'll be doing that. He was very helpful in the Youngkin race in those southern parts of Virginia, so that's our plan.
Okay. You said it was false. The president said it was fake news. What specifically is false?
You'd have to read to me the whole statement, but I think I've commented on it, and you can read the whole. I didn't say false, the whole statement, so you can read.
The statement said this is false. Those are the first three words of the statement.
Read the whole statement. You're parsing it, so.
The first three words are this is false.
I've already said what I was going to say, which is the president stayed in the party. This is a non-issue, and we're going to continue to have him in the party, and we need him.
Just last thing. Did he ever say he would leave? Did he tell you that?
I've already said I'm not talking about my conversations with the president of the United States.
Ronna McDaniel is chair of the Republican National Committee at a breakfast with reporters hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. You can find the full program at our website, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We tape it right here in the C-SPAN studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get all the attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history. From what's new and happening right now, relive the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN podcast, The Weekly. Find it wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. An article at CNBC, a nomination hearing for President Joe Biden's pick to be Comptroller of the Currency, Saule Amarova, turned fiery on Thursday as Democrats and Republicans took jabs at each other over the candidate's unconventional academic works and her upbringing in the Soviet Union. Amarova's nomination to be one of the country's top bank regulators is uncertain given fierce opposition from the GOP and skepticism from moderate Democrats, including Senator John Tester of Montana. The main concern among Republicans and a handful of Democrats is Amarova's writings as a legal scholar, which considers sweeping changes to the U.S. banking system. Here's part of the hearing. Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, ranking Republican on the Banking Committee, questioning the nominee.
In your article, which was published in a law review journal last month, is entitled The People's Ledger. That's the title. And you did advocate nationalizing the business of retail banking. In your words, and I quote, "This article outlines a series of structural reforms that would radically redefine the role of a central bank as the ultimate public platform for generating, modulating, and allocating financial resources in a democratic economy. The People's Ledger," end quote. You also said this article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the Fed's balance sheet. Now, this is meant to create a system. Well, that's a quote, right? This article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the Fed's balance sheet, end quote. According to your article, and I quote, "The proposed reform will effectively end banking." You put end banking in quotes, but this is all your quote. "The proposed reform will effectively end banking as we know it." These are all direct quotes. This is not my characterization. Do you stand by these policy proposals that you published last month?
Senator, thank you for your question. So let me give a little bit of the context about this particular paper.
I've got very little time, so please be very succinct. I have more questions.
Of course, Senator. So as I said, this paper was written in the context of an ongoing academic debate on how to approach digitizing the dollar, because this seems to be an inevitable solution. The paper seeks to address the implications of that step for the entire financial system. The particular phrase that has attracted so much attention was actually my quoting the title of a book that somebody else wrote about fintech, effectively ending banking. My concern is
the phase that's more interesting, not interesting, disturbing to me, isn't necessarily ending banking as we know it, although that's exactly what would happen, but it is your phrase in which, and I'll quote again, this article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the balance sheet. I read a lot of this paper, and it was clear to me that you were not referring exclusively to a central bank digital currency. You're talking about all demand deposits going to the Federal Reserve. Now, are you now saying you're no longer for that?
Senator, what I'm trying to clarify here is the problem this paper was trying to solve. The problem this paper was trying to solve was the fact that if we allow digitization of currency and the issuance of central bank digital currency without thinking through its implications, community banks and mid-sized banks will be put inherently in a losing position.
But Professor Amarova, you've advocated that they lose all their deposits. And then you acknowledge that that means they wouldn't have the resources to lend money. And so you've constructed this whole mechanism whereby they could go to the Fed and get funding to make the loans, provided that they made loans in a fashion that the Fed approved of. I mean, that's the short version.
Senator Pat Toomey, Republican and ranking member on the Banking Committee, questioning Sally Amarova, nominated for Comptroller of the Currency. Another Republican senator during today's hearing, John Kennedy of Louisiana, went even further down this path with his questions.
In 2019, you joined a Facebook group, a Marxist Facebook group, to discuss socialist and anti-capitalist views. Now, that's what I see from your record. And you have the right to believe every one of these things. You do. This is America. But I don't mean any disrespect. I don't know whether to call you professor or comrade.
Oh, my goodness. Senator, I'm not a communist. I do not subscribe to that ideology. I could not choose where I was born. I do not remember joining any Facebook group that subscribes to that ideology. I would never knowingly join any such group. There is no record of me ever actually participating in any Marxist or communist discussions of any kind. My family suffered under the communist regime. I grew up without knowing half of my family. My grandmother herself escaped death twice under the Stalin regime. This is what's seared in my mind. That's who I am. I remember that history. I came to this country. I'm proud to be an American. And this is why I'm here today, Senator. I'm here today because I'm ready for public service.
Comptroller of the Currency nominee, Sally Amarova, with Senator John Kennedy at today's Banking Committee hearing. With more on this nomination, we're joined by Andrew Ackerman, financial regulations reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for being with us. From what you saw today, what's going to happen with this nomination?
From what we saw today, I think the path for confirming Sally Amarova is really unclear. She needed to convince moderate Democrats to support her nomination. Instead, she got criticism from some of them, and the Republicans seemed unified against her. Some called her essentially a communist or a Marxist. Others were, just basically stuck to the substance of some of her legal writings, where she's been quite critical of the financial services and banking industry.
What issues concern those moderate Democrats?
There's a few articles that she's written recently that the industry and Republican lawmakers have raised repeatedly. The first is an article she wrote last year that she described as radical, called for a complete overhaul to the consumer banking system. Right now, if you put deposits if you deposit cash, you deposit them at your local bank or at a commercial bank. Her article envisions a wholesale shift where all the deposits are handled by the Federal Reserve, and some community banks might be able to get a license and handle some consumer deposits on behalf of banks. But basically, she'd effectively, nationalize banks, and the Fed would have a much greater role on the consumer side of things. The other articles or comments she's made, I mean, there's a lot. She's talked about, if we want to address climate change, we want to put oil and gas companies out of business. She's tweeted a lot. She's been very critical of bank buybacks and dividends, about merger activity at some of the biggest banks. And we saw some of that come up, less about the tweeting and more about the articles today, particularly the oil and gas issue.
What is her background? Who is Sally Amarova?
She was born and raised in Kazakhstan when it was a part of the Soviet Union, and she came to the U.S. in 1991. She was on an exchange program with the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and as the Soviet Union was collapsing, and she ended up staying here, going to graduate school. She got a PhD in, I believe, political economy. She studied the oil industry in Kazakhstan. She ended up not really going into political science. She wanted to become a lawyer, so she went to Northwestern Law School. She actually finished her PhD and defended it during her first year of law school in, I believe, 1999. She got a JD. Then she went to a pretty big law firm called called Davis Polk, which specializes in banking. And then she served a year in the Treasury Department as an advisor during the George W. Bush administration. And then she went into teaching, and she's been teaching since about 2007 or 2008.
We're talking with Andrew Ackerman from the Wall Street Journal. Some people may be surprised that we're talking about the Comptroller of the Currency. What does that office do?
It's a little known but very powerful office. They oversee some of the country's biggest banks, Wells Fargo, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and a number of smaller national banks. It was created by President Abraham Lincoln to regulate these institutions. And, a lot of the basic functions of the job are just supervising these enormous institutions and making sure that they operate in a safe and sound manner. It's one of the three powerful banking regulators in town. There's also the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and the FDIC, which regulates depository institutions.
And finally, the hearing held today, you said the fate of the nominee uncertain, so no vote scheduled at this point?
Yeah, the votes have not been scheduled. It is not clear if they have the votes. Because the Senate's evenly split and Republicans appear to be unified against her nomination, she will need all Democrats to support her. We heard today criticism from at least two Democrats, from two Democrats, from Mark Warner of Virginia and from Senator Tester from Montana. They criticized her vote. They criticized her opposition to a bill that passed the Congress in 2008. It eased some regulatory restrictions on mid-sized and smaller banks. She said that she feared it would inadvertently or indirectly help bigger banks, bigger institutions. And then Senator Tester also raised some concerns about some remarks she had early this year where she talked about oil and gas companies, that how we need them to go bankrupt if we want to resolve climate change. Senator Tester said, hey, I'm a small farmer. I could easily see policymakers in D.C. saying, why don't we put you out of business because bigger farms can do what you do much more efficiently. And I thought that was pretty telling. He seemed at the very least to have concerns. He wouldn't say if he would how he's going to vote. He did tell reporters outside the hearing that he'd have a statement later today. So maybe we'll know. Maybe we'll know more later on today.
Andrew Ackerman, financial regulations reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
On Wall Street, the Dow down 60 today, NASDAQ up 72, S&P up 15. United States Postal Service reminding people to send holiday cards and gifts early to make sure they arrive on time, saying they expect to deliver between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day 11 billion letters and cards and another 1 billion packages. In the longer term, though, the Postal Service recommending slowing down delivery of some packages to save money. That came up today when a Postal Regulatory Commission chair, Michael Kubayanda, testified before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. It's a confirmation hearing as he's been nominated for another term. Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, pointing out that what they want to slow down, many people use to get their prescription drugs.
In its attempts to become more financially stable, the U.S. Postal Service proposed delaying delivery times for first-class packages, commonly used by pharmacies and banks, for example, to send lightweight products inexpensively. These delays would affect roughly a third of first-class package volume and cause delays on essential items that people in my state of New Hampshire certainly rely on. In September, the Postal Regulatory Commission issued an advisory opinion on this proposed change and found that the Postal Service's proposal to delay service would not substantially affect its overall financial condition, contrary to the stated goals of the proposal. What options or alternatives do you think the Postal Service could instead pursue to improve its financial condition without compromising service?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think that the Commission has issued 2 advisory opinions on attempts to change service standards, and I think both reached that conclusion that the savings on offer were meager compared to what the Postal Service hopes to achieve. I think that the Postal Service has a number of steps they can take, including modernizing, and I think some of these steps to cut costs over time might require some upfront investment. For example, modernization of the vehicle fleet. Yeah. They have an extremely old vehicle fleet with its poor quality, and they've been known to catch on fire, and then also the efficiency is very low. So I think that's something where upfront investment in capital investment can lead to some savings down the line. I think there are, we just approved a new rate-making system for the Postal Service, and I think that it's an opportunity to kind of stabilize postal finances, or at least move the ball forward and improve postal finances. So I think that's something they can capitalize on. And I think long-term, I think there are opportunities for efficiency through information technology, reconsidering how to utilize their extensive network of physical facilities to distribute mail more efficiently. And I think one of the things that we're launching is a data analytics group to look at issues within the postal network, including whether it's aligned in the most efficient manner, and looking at possible bottlenecks and pinch points within that network where the Postal Service might stand to improve. And so I think there are opportunities for incremental improvements over time.
Michael Kubayanda with the Postal Regulatory Commission, named chair this year by President Biden and nominated for another term on the commission. A confirmation hearing today. Questions from Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, says that the Postal Service lost $87 billion over the past 14 fiscal years, lost revenue and unfunded liabilities. That includes $9.2 billion in fiscal year 2020, expecting to lose $9.7 billion in fiscal year 2021. President Biden signing into law 3 bipartisan bills today dealing with police and first responders. One increases disability and death benefits for first responders injured in the line of duty. A second expands the Justice Department's ability to prosecute people accused of killing U.S. law enforcement agents abroad. And the third is on police counseling. Here's President Biden on that bill.
According to one study, law enforcement officers are 54% more likely to die by suicide than the average American because they're under such enormous pressure and they see things none of us ever see. The vast majority of law enforcement officers tell us that peer support programs are the most helpful mental health resource there is. And that makes sense. If you hold just a second, it makes you, when you think about it, law enforcement as well as the military, all taught to be stand your own. Don't ask for anything. You can do it. Just take care of it yourself. And it's an enormous burden we put on people. And it's really difficult. I've learned working so diligently with the military community. It's so hard to get them to say, hey, I need some help. I need some help. I want you to know a wound that is imposed on your mind is no different than if you broke your arm or got shot in the leg. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It deserves to be treated. And it deserves the respect that goes along with that. Because the strongest support and the best guidance often come from someone who has walked in their shoes. However, many officers don't access peer support because they have concerns about privacy and confidentiality. And only about half the states have confidentiality protections. But this bill, and I want to thank the Congress for this, encourages first responders agencies to adapt peer counseling programs, require the Department of Justice to make the best practices and resources publicly available for people who want to become peer support mentors, and ensure confidentiality to federal law enforcement officers who use peer counseling services, with the only exception being admission of a criminal conduct and/or a threat of serious physical harm. My hope is by giving more officers access to confidentiality and high-quality mental health resources, we're going to reduce the stigma around seeking help and lead to better policing and prevent suicides.
President Biden at the White House signing that bill and others dealing with first responders and police, also asking Congress to come together and pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. There were negotiations this year between Republicans and Democrats on that bill, but they could not reach agreement on final text. President Biden confirming today the U.S. is considering a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in China. And that means the U.S. would not send an official delegation, and it would be in protest against China's human rights abuses. President saying that while meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister today in the Oval Office. And then later at the White House briefing, Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked for some more information.
Could you just explain what a diplomatic boycott would mean? I'm assuming that doesn't mean athletes. It means something narrower. And then secondly, coming so soon after the meetings with President Xi, what does that say about the meetings this last week? Were they not constructive that the president would be considering this big move?
Sure. Well, let me take the second question first. It doesn't say anything about the meeting. They didn't talk about the Olympics during the meeting. It wasn't a topic that was discussed during the meeting. I would note that we've said from the beginning of this administration, as it relates to how we engage with China, that we see it through the prism of competition, not conflict. That is our objective, that the president is going to raise issues where he has concern, and he's going to look for areas to work together. And his lengthy 3.5-hour meeting the other night was certainly a reflection of that. Both areas where we could work together and areas where we have concern were raised, as you all know from the readouts following the meeting. But, there are areas that we do have concerns. Human rights abuses, you've seen not just in words we've used, but certainly in actions we've taken at the G7 and other sanctions, that we have serious concerns about the human rights abuses we've seen in Xinjiang. And certainly there are a range of factors as we look at what our presence would be. So I don't have any other update for you, Amar. I certainly understand the interest, but I want to leave the president the space to make decisions.
Is it possible that you can just at least broadly, because I'm sure that a lot of Americans that are interested in the upcoming games and a lot of athletes want to know what that could potentially mean, what diplomatic boycott entails?
I certainly understand that. I just don't have an update on where what our presence will be.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. On Capitol Hill, Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, calling on the administration to implement a complete boycott of the Beijing Olympics.
For these reasons, the safety and security of our own athletes and China's crimes against the world, we should launch a complete and total boycott of China's genocide Olympics. I regret that this would prevent about 300 of America's world-class athletes from competing in the Olympics. I sympathize with them. However, they have been failed by this administration, who months ago, could have worked with our allies to develop a plan to conduct these games in another country. They've been failed by the leaders of the international Olympic movement, who should have never awarded these games to a communist tyranny. So today, I call on the Biden administration to boycott the Chinese Winter Olympics.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican, news conference on Capitol Hill. He says that means no athletes, no diplomats, no corporate sponsors. Wikipedia entry for a list of Olympic Games boycotts reads that during its history there have been boycotts on 6 occasions, all of them Summer Olympics. First boycott occurred in the 1956 Summer Olympics, and the most recent was at the 1988 Summer Olympics. And they write possibly the most famous Olympic boycotts occurred in 1980 and 1984 during the Cold War.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well...
And finally, the man who wrote that song, which has entertained and educated many children about how the U.S. legislative process works, David Frischberg, has passed away. New York Times reports his wife confirms that he died on Wednesday. Frischberg was also a noted jazz songwriter and singer. He was 88 years old. And thanks for listening today to Washington Today. For more top Washington stories, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Friday morning, former FDIC Vice Chair Thomas Honig on President Biden's economic policies. And former Democratic Senator and One Country Project founder Heidi Heitkamp discusses rural voters and their impact on elections. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Friday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.